Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Firewall, the business bytecast, where tech meets business. Get expert insights from real-world business leaders, IT experts, and the latest trends in bite-sized episodes. Stay ahead and explore what's beyond the firewall. Hello, and welcome back to the Beyond the Firewall, where we're always looking for amazing topics and conversations so that you're more prepared about what's coming up next. Today, we're going to be talking about AI, and I'm really privileged to bring in one of our experts and advisors, Tamas. Tamas, why don't you introduce yourself to all our guests?
Yeah, hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Erez. Thank you for having me on. This is obviously a hot topic and very relevant and top of mind to so many companies, all companies, I would say. It feels like all we're talking about these days is AI. And what's interesting to me about that is my background is in integration and process automation. So a lot of the kinds of things that we're looking to AI to do today, automate processes and streamline the way businesses operate, integrate different kinds of applications together. Those are in many ways the same things that I've been working on over the last 20, 30 years. As technology has changed, the way we do things is different. And now it feels like the moment has arrived where people are realizing, because of this very exciting new set of tools that AI is providing us, that there are so many opportunities to automate processes, to streamline the way we do things. And it's a very exciting time to be in that space. So, I'm very excited to speak with you about this and explore some of, what's going on and what are some of the challenges. That there's so much noise and hype and fear of missing out and uncertainty about how to proceed. And, everyone has a different answer and a different solution, and it's changing day to day, almost minute to minute. There's some new thing going on. And so sometimes it's difficult to figure out where to begin, what's the starting point. And so we can, dig into some approaches of how to think about this, how to go about it methodically, and where are AI tools the right thing to turn to, and where is the benefit actually going to come from other things that the AI tools are facilitating.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's one of those sort of big mysteries to a lot of companies. We hear, on the IT side of things, I'm using ChatGPT, I'm using Gemini, I'm using Copilot, and there's, I think, like 30, 50 products that I hear almost on a daily basis. And, do I know them all? The answer is no. And the question is now, and I try to distill it to a lot of companies. So, let's simplify this. So if I've not yet started to play with AI today, my natural conversation with most of my employees, we must start with ChatGPT. I have not been doing that recommendation, and I have been saying to the customer, well, if you're in Google, let's play with Gemini. And if you're a Microsoft customer, let's play with Copilot. I'd like to hear your perspective on, like, if you have not yet gotten into AI, where should you begin?
Yeah, for sure. And that's an interesting question, because there's a real range of people's approaches and kind of experiences. So a lot of people's experience with AI has been primarily focused on their personal life, right? So, they're if they've played with ChatGPT, it's probably, give me an itinerary for a trip, or they're doing some research, or they're encountering Gemini in Google search results, for example. I think for many people, that's probably their most frequent interaction. And so people are used to that conversational chat style interface, which obviously started with ChatGPT. That was sort of technology behind all of this generative AI has been percolating and developing for a very long time. But the introduction of ChatGPT and that conversational, or the chat interface to speaking with an LLM, is really what I think exploded it and blew people's minds in terms of just what kind of information it had access to and what its capabilities were in terms of taking all of the information that it's been fed, basically, not quite the entire sum of human knowledge, but like a very substantial portion of it, and how putting that into an LLM and giving it that conversational interface really yield something transformative and magical that was just blowing people's minds of like, what is this able to do? And this was what, like 3 years ago, right? Like late 2003 or whenever is when this really sort of started to take off. And it's amazing to see how far we've come in terms of the capabilities. And yet at the same time, for most people, it's still the same thing. They're working with that chat box, maybe using voice instead of typing, using some other interfaces, but it's still in many ways from like a personal productivity point of view very similar, and that's changing now, like in the last 6 months or so. But from the business point of view, things are a little bit different because there are very specific, um, a lot of the tools around content marketing and generative uses of AI are not so much chat based, but focused on taking specific information, processing it, producing reports and analysis and summaries and aggregations and search, and then using those results to create content or to feed that into presentations or customer communications or customization and so forth. And one of the interesting things that's sort of happening now as this gains greater awareness is a lot of those kinds of tools are now kind of diffusing out to more personal use cases. So you've seen, for example, Claude with their co-work tool. It's still focused on business use cases, but it's also focusing on broadening out what are the inputs and what are the kind of information that we're working with. So it's not just going out into the latent knowledge that's in these models and the web search, but working more with practical tasks that we're doing day to day using our computers or using our technology. So the the shift has been kind of ChatGPT is like the Kleenex of LLMs, right? The brand name that's synonymous with the product category. And for a long time, that there was a good justified reason for that. But what's really developed over the last year is Claude and Gemini especially have really caught up very well. For a lot of use cases, Gemini is sort of leading the pack in terms of capabilities for coding. Claude has been sort of the go-to for a while and continues to be a real kind of the leading solution for software developers. Coding and software development is one of the industries that's most heavily impacted by this rapidly evolving technology. And so, and I mean, Copilot is interesting because Copilot is some Microsoft technologies that are specific to Copilot, but largely is basically OpenAI models as well. So it's ChatGPT under the covers. So those main commercial models are what we're all working with, and I don't know what you've seen kind of personally. A lot of people still reach for OpenAI because that's the default, but the balance of mind share I think is really more nebulous now. Like a lot of people will use multiple different models to try different variations of the same search. And if you're really going down the rabbit hole, then you can do things by combining different agents from different models to work together based on their different strengths. It's changing almost on a day-to-day or minute-to-minute basis what the right tool is for a particular task. And then kind of in parallel to that foundation model development, you mentioned that there's these 50 tools. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds, thousands probably of AI tools that are constantly being launched. They're built on largely the same foundation models, but they all bring their own kind of special spin to whether it's like a vertical specific tool focusing on a particular industry or something focusing on podcast production or SEO optimization or whatever it is. There's just that constant almost flood of new options, and it really can become overwhelming to understand how do we keep up with this, right? How do we focus on what is going to actually be useful and impactful in our lives and our businesses?
So that's an interesting conversation, and I'm starting to see a bit of a, call it a percolation or some sort of a new demand is around AI advisory around business. So Is that something that we see companies going to hire a director of AI services or AI deliverables, or is this something that, today companies should be looking at hiring, somebody like yourself who's got, a decade of, decades of integration development skill sets, and now has become an AI expert because you can combine those two expertise into now sort of, let's call it, leading edge. Is that something that, companies are going to look for internally, or is this something that, a fractional advisor is really where companies should be going to today?
Changing very quickly. I think today there's never been more information more readily available, and at the same time, that's a blessing and a curse because it's also harder to sort through it. So keeping up with this stuff is almost a full-time job. Just keeping up with the new product launches and announcements and enhancements and the evolutions. I think that long term, so if 2, 3, 5 years from now, I mean, it's almost unfathomable to me to think that far ahead given how fast things are changing. But at the same time, if I can dare to look that far ahead, I think a lot of what we're seeing now is going to become more commonplace. At one point, you would need to have, let's say, in the 2000s, you would need to bring in like the internet expert or like the web expert. And the
Right.
cybersecurity wasn't even a question 20 years ago, but now those are kind of expected routine parts of the responsibility of the CIO or the CTO. And so because this technology is so new and moving so quickly, and it's sometimes difficult to keep up, yes, there's absolutely a role for specialists to come in and advise and assist with adoption and vendor selection and implementation and all of that. And but I think longer term, we're all going to become more familiar with these tools and technologies. And I don't know that they'll ever become boring, but they will become a lot more commonplace. And I think Microsoft and Google are both kind of really showing the way there. Sometimes it feels like they're like cramming Copilot and Gemini into like everything. Like everything has a Gemini mode or a Copilot mode and whatnot, which is definitely part of Microsoft and Google trying to steer customers to use their AI tools and to kind of demonstrate value. But I think that's also where a lot of this is headed. It will become almost just a default part of how we operate. I think Apple gets a lot of criticism for some of their Apple Intelligence rollout. They approach things differently and in some ways not as successfully as some other companies. But I think what's interesting is what they really hit upon is the the subtle ways that these AI tools and capabilities will just become part of how we operate. It won't be something that we have to activate or reach for or prompt or control. They will just become part of how we do business and how we operate and how we run our businesses. And so one of the interesting forks I see coming up, and I don't know which way this is going to go, is there's a lot of talk right now about the Claude Cowork and some of its application creation capabilities, and it just caused a dip in the stock markets because everyone's like, oh my God, AI is going to be generating all of our applications and every software vendor is going to become irrelevant. And I don't think that's going to be the case because these general purpose software creation capabilities that the models have, they are magical. They do incredible, amazing things, but they don't have the complete situational knowledge that is essential to create actual functional, reliable business tools, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's fine if your generative text tool produces different outputs every time or sometimes hallucinates something and needs to be reviewed and corrected. That's fine. But if we're doing practical things like monitoring inventory, doing financial transactions, like there's no space for my AI hallucinated some inventory in bin 12. And so there's a lot of control and like specialized, practical, hard earned industry knowledge that the software industry has built up literally over decades. And I think the other branch of this is existing software vendors, existing application vendors using these tools, building those capabilities in sometimes in very obvious ways and sometimes in very subtle ways to improve their products, to improve the interfaces, the reporting, the capabilities, the predictive functionality. So, it's going to be a mix of all those things. So, some of that, coming back to your question about, will companies need to always bring in external experience? I mean, some of that they're going to get through service providers like MIT, as you know, the MSP industry as a whole builds its familiarity and knowledge. Some of that will accrue to all of the clients as the vendors build their capabilities and refine them and make them easier and more integrated. That will also kind of accrue to the market at large. And there will always need to be some awareness among CIOs, CTOs, business owners of how these things play. Having said all of that, there are also very specific things that companies have the option and in some cases will need to learn to be able to do in terms of applying these tools. So, one of the big areas that we're focusing on is helping companies go through and identify the processes and how can we, first of all, understand them
Hmm.
and then optimize, control, automate in order to get the best advantage of as these tools come in place to get the best advantage of those. And there's an interesting statistic that came out of the Boston Consulting Group report. They call it the 10-20-70 rule. And basically, what they found in some of their research in terms of having success with AI implementation is, 10% of it is like the specific algorithms, 20% is the specific technology, but 70% of what differentiates successful versus unsuccessful implementations is not the technology, but it's the people and the processes and how well they were implemented into the organization. So the technology is very much an enabler. It is the thing that makes all these things possible. But you need to find the right and appropriate ways to apply it in order to get the best benefit from it. We've all seen the statistic from that MIT report that 95% of generative AI pilots stall with little financial impact, and I think it's because businesses so far have largely been throwing stuff at the wall. Right? They're like, let's just try a bunch of stuff and see what happens. And what we're learning is we're learning lessons from that, but we're spending a lot of time doing things that don't work. And it's now becoming more and more clear what are the things that do work? What are the things that are worth trying? And, how do we take a look at the entire process space and start nibbling away at it in order to get real measurable benefit from rolling out these tools?
Interesting. Yeah, it is it's an interesting time when we look at it. 20 years ago, a lot of companies didn't have like a director of IT. It was like a IT manager, and I tell people like there's been so many positions that didn't exist 20 years ago. There was no SEO, online marketing. There was no, developer that did AI coding. Never mind, using some of the tools that we're using today. And the whole IT industry has been, disrupted with thousands of different types of positions, from quality assurance to coders to, whatever or not in respect to that. From, in the last decade, we're still seeing a series of new positions. So AI is going to evolve. Definitely, today there's no real chief AI officer, as some would call it. You don't see, Fortune 5000s that have those people filling in those shoes. It's currently sitting on a lot of the, you know, chief information or CIO or CTO's position, and they're still trying to figure it out. I feel like, because there's so many unknown variables and there's so many interesting crossroads that we're seeing over the next little while, I feel like, when we look at the bigger picture, and I look at it as a general conversation, the masses, and you kind of touched on it, where today they're using it for, their personal use or their vacation planning, or what's their favorite restaurant, and basically Google search 2.0, all right, or whatever we want to call it, Google search 3.0. It's a new interface to ask something about where to go and what to do. How are companies and how are individuals out there able to better be ready to adopt using this technology in every aspect of their lives? And how do companies help embrace that? I know it's a two-pronged question, but I think
Sure.
this is a big one where we get calls every day. I think, you were involved with one of those opportunities and those calls where company has like 100 employees. They're trying to figure out, okay, I've got an accounting department, a marketing, a projects, the sales department. They're trying to get everybody on AI, but they don't have a real action plan, and they're just trying to get everybody to just jump in and start using it. So how do you get companies to build out a plan, and at the same time, how do you convince and incentivize employees or people to start using it effectively beyond just a Google search or just as a fun tool to use as a productivity tool?
Yeah, totally. So I think what it comes down to, and the answer to, I think both of those questions starts from the same place of being really clear on what outcome you're trying to achieve, right? Like, the question you're describing is, a business owner recognizing that this tool is amazing, having played with it, and they see some of the potential, and then the request is, okay, now I want to AI my business, right? So like just AI the operations, and that's okay. That's a starting point, but what does that mean? And so the process really becomes one of looking at it both from there's three things, right? There's people, process, and technology.
Okay.
So the technology, I think we know it's changing very quickly. We know it's very dynamic, but it's also, I think, a relatively well understood part of this set of three things. There's lots of information. There's lots of examples. There's lots of best practices that have come up over the last few years. So the next two things are people and process, right? And I think those are approached individually and also together because they all interact. So looking at the people side, having that conversation and doing the exploration of, first of all, employees comfortable, like how comfortable are they with AI in general, right? Like there's
Mhm.
a lot of fear and uncertainty. Some people have been playing with it at home and excited, and they wanted to bring some of that excitement into their work environment. A lot of people are already doing that. And so, as you know from a lot of other IT areas, one of the challenges is people bringing their own stuff and their own, not corporate controlled products and tools and AI stuff into the business, and causing governance hassles and whatnot. So that's one category of person who is enthusiastic and comfortable with the tools and has a good sense of how to use them to work with their business challenges or places where they can apply them. But there are also lots of folks who are, nervous or tentative. Folks who are concerned about, what does this mean? Is this going to replace my job? Right? Am I going to be replaced by a robot? And I think that's a very legitimate concern. And I think we acknowledge that when we look at people, the people aspect of how AI is changing businesses is understanding, okay, what are my people feeling and how are they interacting or experiencing some of these changes, because you can have something like some real hard mandates, right? So like recently Meta announced that they are now basically, I mean, they're saying it's just advisory, that AI use will become part of the employee's performance evaluation or expectations. But they're certainly not the first company that's made an announcement like that. And so there's a mandate, that thou shalt use AI to do your job. Um, but it's not always clear what that means to employees, because when we're looking from the people perspective, there's a need for each person to understand, okay, here are the boundaries of the work that I do. Here's the kind of information I work with. Here are the applications of the systems that I'm working with. Here's the information I'm working with. Here's how I communicate with customers or vendors or partners or whatever it is. And being able to take each employee's individual understanding of the work that they do, and then helping them identify, okay, these are the ways, these are the things that you do that you're spending a lot of time on. Because typically the benefits will be reducing time spent on repetitive or automatable tasks. So these are the things that you're doing. This is how you spend your day. And look at this 3 hours of your day you're spending on something that you're manipulating stuff in Excel, and hey, you know what? Copilot could do some of that, right? Or Gemini could do some of that for you. Or you're spending a lot of time going out and gathering, information from competitive sites in order to do this kind of market positioning for us on a weekly basis. And you're spending 6 hours gathering and collating that information. And that's exactly the kind of task that modern AI is very good at. So the people part is really raising the awareness and comfort level of employees to recognize what parts of their work are well suited to using AI tools to perform, and then also making sure they have the skills and familiarity and support to actually be able to do that. We've learned over the last several years that the way we ask AI to do things can have a significant impact on the kinds of results we get. And so two employees may sit down and try something, and one of them asks one way, the other one asks a different way. And one says, oh, hey, look, a great result. This is exactly what I wanted. And the other employee says, this is garbage and it doesn't work. And why am I going to waste my time with it? And so, just building the awareness, getting those conversations going, and just building comfort in a very gradual way is the first part of building the people part, so that they are comfortable and ready to increasingly use these tools. And again, this comes back to what I was saying about it. It just becomes part of the routine, right? The magic sort of goes away and it becomes routine. If we look at our cell phones, right? Like these little black rectangles that we all carry around with us, they are magic, right? Pre-AI, like you've got the world of information on this thing in your hand that talks through the air to all the other things around the world. Like it's really magical, and yet it's also so mundane. Like it's just so
Yeah.
routine, and everyone's comfortable with it. And that is an evolution that we're going to go through, where all of these magical capabilities will just become like, that's how technology works. Like no one in Star Trek is amazed that the computer talks back to them, right? That's just how the computers work. And
Yeah.
we are moving towards that kind of future.
I think that when we look at university kids today, they're coming out of school with that skill set, right? Like they're using, like the teachers are already having to counteract all their capabilities when it comes to, doing homework and assignments. They're like, are you using AI? And they're trying to do AI busters. Whereas, like, people that have been in the workforce for 10, 20, 30 years, they're now concerned about how much work they are going to lose or productivity. But I relate that back to, 20, 30 years ago, where every office had a typewriter, and like, it was on how fast you can type was if you got the job or not. And those jobs became obsolete. Like, when was the last time you walked into an office and saw a typewriter sitting on any desk? Like, nobody's using
Yeah.
that today. And I don't even see a postal machine in most businesses, where you had to run and scan all the post and send it off and wait 3 to 6 days to get your letters back. But
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
technologies keep making us more efficient. It's a matter of embracing it and realizing that this is what's going to happen. You can choose to be on the ride, or you can choose to be left behind. And I think that that is the reality with a lot of what you're saying. Is there's a lot of intricacies around this. You can play it in different avenues, but fundamentally, if you don't get on the ride, the bus is still going to go, or the roller
Totally.
coaster is still moving ahead. So
Yeah.
you can choose if you want to be a spectator or not. And I
Yeah.
think that's a big fundamental conversation, that everybody does not need to be an expert in AI, but they can't shy away from using the technology. Because
Absolutely.
an amazing analogy, that when you look at a sci-fi movie like Star Trek, or like, I love Star Trek, where you like walk into your room and you're like, computer, make me a coffee. How hot would you like it to be? I want it scorching hot. And voila, like there's your coffee, and it's, the temperature you like it to be and the flavor you want it to be. Like may not have a synthesized cup of coffee that's, generated by whatever particles or 3D printer coffee tomorrow, but that could be 10 to 20 years away, because I know they're working on 3D printed food, and we're already get to the point where we're doing lab grown food today. So all of this sci-fi reality is happening, and having this AI technology to say, okay, I'm driving home with my car. I know the car knows I'm going home. I want the house to warm up. I want my stove to get pre-warmed. It should get the lights on in the house, because it's, in the middle of winter and it's dark already outside, and I don't like driving to a home that all the lights are off. And the smart stuff can communicate with me and say, I'm seeing that you're driving home. Let me get things ready for you so that you're having a more comfortable experience walking into your own house. That's coming,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
So,
And I think what you're describing there is spot on and very much speaks to what I was saying earlier about it. It just becomes routine. It becomes mundane. Like a lot of the things just become part of how the world operates as these technologies become more integrated. And the interesting thing is, a lot of that shift is going to be away from the focus today, which is on data centers, and it's on these giant models, the frontier models that a lot of the advancements are happening on. But there's, in parallel to that, mostly I think out of the public awareness, there's an equivalent amount of progress on small language models and other forms of machine learning that aren't generative AI, and local on device capabilities. Again, one of the things that Apple did differently in their rollout is they focused very much on what can we do using AI and AI related technologies on the device, and how do we make those not require the data center, not require the round trip, maybe work without, if you don't happen to have an internet connection or a cellular connection. And we're going to start seeing more of that. So a lot of the use cases you just described will be things maybe we'll have kind of a standard part of every home will be like your home AI or whatever it is. Just like we have Alexa or Google Home or HomePod, that is the smarts in your home. There will be a lot of capabilities in the smart home will really become more smart. And it's interesting. I'm just going to take a step back here to what you were saying about people having to be ready for it. If I come back to the technology people process sort of triangle, I was talking before about the people aspect and people individually becoming comfortable and productive with AI tools. That leads to the process part, which I think is where so many of the really significant long-term gains are going to happen, and where it's still quite fuzzy to a lot of businesses about what is that about. And that is the part where consultants or service providers, or maybe a dedicated staff member dedicated to AI implementation, or maybe the CIO will be steering, how do we, this is now where we get to like really AI my business, right? Is now take this people that we have who are fluent and familiar and comfortable with this technology, and how do we apply that to the DNA of the business itself, right? I think we've all heard the idea that, like, the first $1 trillion one person company has probably already been founded, and it's going to be facilitated by AI being able to do everything. I mean, maybe that's true or maybe that's not. I would argue that actually sounds awful, that we could possibly even have one person able to generate that much wealth individually. I mean, it's great for that one person. I don't know what it does for the rest of society, but that's a different podcast, I think. Um, but uh,
yeah, you
but
could be
but
right
the,
about that.
yeah, but the truth is that companies, like if you were starting a manufacturing business today, or you're starting even something like, a service, like a residential services business today, if you're starting a creative agency today, the way you would build those things today, you would incorporate all of the current AI technologies and tools right from day one. and you design your processes around those, and the way you hire and where you hire and how you design and implement your processes, you would take that into consideration. It's like businesses, 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about companies being cloud native or solutions being cloud native, where they started on AWS or Azure or whatnot. And I mean, you've been living this every day, is companies have been going through that transition, and it's taken 10, 15 years to go from the world of client server and desktops and VPNs and on-prem and colo and all that kind of stuff, and the shift to being in the cloud has been a real process for businesses as they piece by piece, opportunity by opportunity, adopt the newer ways of doing things. And I think it's going to be very similar for AI adoption. Sometimes it'll be when a business is replacing part of their operation, or they're expanding into a new market or a new area, that'll be a chance to do things a new way. And then once that's proven out and comfortable, then we backport it to the rest of the business. Or we start, function by function. Maybe we start, by bringing, we look at what are all the functions in the business and where are we going to get the best benefit. Maybe it's in HR, right? Maybe there's something around, managing schedules and timetables, or managing performance reviews, or whatever it is, that maybe that's the right area to apply AI tools in. And maybe the solution comes from a vendor, right? So maybe the HR platform you're using has added some capabilities. I mean, I guarantee you they have. They're all doing it, and so
Yeah.
maybe that's the way. But maybe there's also a larger level in terms of, okay, how do we now take the different parts of my business that have this disparate assortment of vendor specific, or maybe it's like a co-pilot feature or something like that. How do we take those things now and more holistically integrate them into the larger process of the business? And so that's the process part. And part of that is, having folks like us who are have a background in that, and know how to go do the process mapping and identify those areas for improvement or optimization and implementation. But it also does come back to the people in the company being ready and willing to adopt those changes, and the technology being ready. I never worry about the technology part. The technology is always ready. And if it's not ready today, by tomorrow it probably will be. But going in and really harmonizing all three of those things is going to be the path that leads us to that autonomous future that you were describing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I want to thank you for that, because at the end of the day, there's no silver bullet. We're not talking here, there's like a turnkey solution. We're not in that era yet. So this is still in the early adopter era, where things are changing way too rapidly. Companies are still trying to figure out all the intricacies, how it's going to work, how it's going to do things. And at the end of the day, when we look at why there's this much pressure, and I think that when we look at it, a lot of business owners, they're either embracing it, they've got their head in the sand, wherever they are in that part of the journey. There is a real reason. And fundamentally, the way I see it is, it's happening. It's happening faster than any other technology
Totally.
beforehand. So, emails came in, and everyone's like, you weren't like, you didn't have to buy into the email system right away. And doctors were still faxing documents back and forth till like 10 years ago, where if you wanted to get records of your medical from your whatever, not your doctor wouldn't even accept an email. It was still only by fax. And I think even legal was still predominantly by fax until the pandemic. And only because of the pandemic did lawyers really pivot to Zoom and email and other forms of registered communication. um, is changing much quicker in that pace across the board. I would say that's every aspect. If it's hospitality, if it's service, if it's residential, consumer, B2B, B2C, we are seeing right now a proliferation of adoption that we have yet to have seen. And it's because we're so used to a high pace of acceptance. So that, if you're not doing this by the end of the year, you're no longer valid. You're no longer meeting me as a consumer or a buyer in my expectations. So, if it's me selling you a computer and I don't have an AI agent to help you buy that computer, or me looking to make reservations, and an open table is not going to come out with an AI advisor on finding the restaurant versus me scrolling through their app 20 minutes to find an available restaurant in my neighborhood on a Saturday night, which is what I currently do today. Like I'm talking real world examples here. I'm sure everybody's done this. We're like,
Yeah.
no, that restaurant's busy. No, not in my favorite time zone. And I'm looking for, whatever, Italian or Asian food. Next thing you know, if I'm spending an hour just going through, reservations to try to find one restaurant that's available. So, like, all these simple things that we take for granted are going to become a reality. And right now, there's a bit of like uncertainty on how that's going to play out in a lot of different sectors. But I think overall, when we look at the overall benefit long term, it's going to make us way more efficient. A lot of this stuff today, nobody wants to do. The
Hmm.
reason why companies came out with apps like Expedia and Open Table and DoorDash, and I don't want to go to a travel agent and spend an hour and a half going through catalogs and figuring out what my family vacation is going to look like. I want to tell something and for them to narrow that all down to me and give me some suggestions. And then here's your vacation that you should go on. And, or I'm a business and I need to find a service provider. And this is the size of company that I am. And I don't want to find a company that's going to service my needs at double my budget. And or I'm a bigger company and I don't want to find a 1 2 man operation. I'm looking for a company that's big enough to service my company needs. And right now, the way the internet search is designed, and it's not just Google, it could be every other search engine out there, it's ambiguous. You're looking at a website and you're saying, I can't tell if this is a two-person operation or if it's a Fortune 500. The websites are all the same today. So being able to build this logic behind it and being able to help figure things out that you normally would have to, do trial and error and figure things out and spend lots of time doing it. I think we're in an interesting pivotal time that will make us all more efficient, more productive, less lost time. Yes, there's going to be some losers in this. There are going to be companies that will be shut down. There's individuals and people that will lose their jobs. I think that thousands upon thousands of jobs will be created in other sectors. I think that we have yet to discover some jobs and businesses that have yet to been created. I think also some what's the word, legacy skills and trades and you know arts or whatever it may be, professions will resurrect. I can almost say like the sourdough era, that everyone now is
Hmm.
making sourdough bread. Like, it wasn't a thing for the longest time. You wouldn't even see it on a shelf. Now everybody's talking sourdough, thanks to 3 years of being locked into your home, and it's still growing. It's not even done. So now I'm seeing cheese, like on Instagram, I'm seeing people now making their own cheeses at home. Like it's a new artisan startup, and so it's an interesting society of evolution, that things go around, come around, new wheels get created, things in the past start getting resurrected. I think we're in a very interesting time, and I want to thank you, Thomas, for coming to our show. Um, I always like to give our guests sort of like words of wisdom to sort of wrap things up. As everybody's embracing a different stage of our AI journey, sort of what would you recommend everybody kind of look into, or maybe somewhere that they can kind of focus their energy on, or some last words of wisdom around AI and what we should be expecting?
So I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit here.
Go for it.
You touched on it a bit. I think that there's so much excitement around AI and the things that it can do and how it can open up new opportunities. And uh, a lot of times when I hear people talking about, there will be, yes, there will be job losses. There will be entire categories of work that we don't need anymore. And we haven't even talked about robotics yet and how that's going to eliminate
We'll
entire
do
other
that next time.
categories of work, right?
Next one.
Yeah. So my closing thought would be, I think it's important for all of us as members of society to be aware of kind of the larger picture, because this isn't just a cool new technology. This is really, a world changing shift in how society operates.
Yeah.
And, it's easy to throw our hands up and say, well, what are you going to do? Right. Like you either, adopt it or fall behind. And that might be true. But also at the same time, it's true that, we owe it to one another to be open to solutions and approaches to help our friends and neighbors navigate this whole transition societally. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. So I would say, uh, just let's keep in mind, as I was talking about the emotional impact on our people and the way it's going to impact them on the larger level. Let's always be aware that none of this is happening in a vacuum. And I'm sometimes optimistic and sometimes I despair about where this is all going to lead. But I think the more attention we pay and the more care we have for one another, the more likely it is that we'll have a good outcome for everyone.
Well, Thomas, I want to thank you for being on this podcast. I think that those are amazing words of wisdom. I think we all can, think about that and reflect back on this whole podcast. I think there's a lot of nuggets here that, people should be thinking about. So thank you for your time. I really hope that you'll be back out. Maybe we will start with robotics and full systems automation. But everybody
Yeah.
out there, thank you for listening. We hope you click that follow and subscribe. Thomas, have yourself a great day. Thank you for coming out. We'll see you there. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It's been great.